I really just kind of wanted to get more into the CrossFit community, more interested in sort of where things were going, especially as we were moving. CrossFit as an organization is moving away from the sort of games mentality into more of a health mentality. And I remember saying a lot of times, like in Huntsville when I was training, that CrossFit is wasted on the fit. Like it really felt like, if we're training for the game, training for the open, or people are training for the games and stuff like that. And there's this huge emphasis on this elite fitness that I was like, it's kind of wasted on people that already have it, whereas like there's people that like me that needed it so bad, that had to sort of, we were embraced and brought into it, but not the way we would be embraced now. We had to sort of, you had to break in.
You had a lot more barriers to come up against.
Yeah, you had to break in a little bit still. So, I always that was always one of the things that I said, CrossFit was wasted on the fit. So I would, when, I sort of saw this shift going on and heard some of the stuff that Coach Glassman was talking about, I was like, I want to get in on this. I want to check it out.
You're listening to episode number 114 with Dr. Maude Dull. This episode is brought to you by ButcherBox. I'm really excited to share with you that this month, in addition to $20 off your first order, ButcherBox has a very special gift that is so good, I can't even mention it on the podcast. You can learn more about it at butcherbox.com/Julie, where you can find all the details. So if you know me, you know I care a lot about where my food comes from, and that's particularly true when it comes to meat. I believe that meat can have a place in a well-rounded diet, but there's a huge difference when it comes to animals that are raised in feedlots and that are fed primarily corn and soy and routinely given growth hormones and antibiotics, and those that are responsibly raised, fed their natural diet, and never given growth hormones or antibiotics. High-quality meat like this is hard to find, but ButcherBox makes it super easy because they deliver 100% grass-fed and finished beef, free-range organic chicken, and heritage breed pork, as well as wild Alaskan sockeye salmon directly to your doorstep. All of their products are humanely raised and never, ever given antibiotics or hormones. This gives me some peace of mind knowing that I can trust my meat is the highest quality out there and will taste amazing. Plus, they offer free shipping anywhere in the contiguous 48 United States, which is awesome. Right now, ButcherBox has put together a very special deal for all Pursuing Health listeners. If you order your first box, you'll get a very special gift plus an additional $20 off. And as I mentioned, that special gift is so epic, I can't even talk about it here. You'll have to go to butcherbox.com/Julie to check out the deal and get your $20 off your first order. Now remember, it's only available until supplies last, so go check it out right now. Once again, that's $20 off plus a special gift with your first box by going to butcherbox.com/Julie. Check it out. I promise it will be worth it. Welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Julie Fouché, family medicine resident and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring to you information and inspiration from experts and everyday individuals for how to use lifestyle to maximize health. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode. Well, hello there and welcome back to Pursuing Health. In this upcoming episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Maude Dull, who's a pediatric intensivist currently practicing in the San Francisco area. Maude and I first met at a recent MDL1 seminar, one of the CrossFit Level 1 seminars that are being held exclusively for physicians as part of the CrossFit Health movement. And there she shared a bit of her story with me. I was absolutely captivated by her personal experience of reclaiming her own health after decades of struggling with her weight and working in a fast-paced, high-adrenaline career. So, Maude and I caught up recently at San Francisco CrossFit to talk about her path in medicine, her struggles with her weight despite always being very active, and how she finally changed her habits to overcome obesity, and more recently, why she's made the shift from training for the CrossFit Games Open to training for longevity, and what prompted her to join the CrossFit Health movement. There are so many great insights and pearls in this conversation, and I'm so grateful to Maude for her willingness to share her story in such a raw and unedited way. So I hope you'll learn as much from her as I did. Now, before we get started, a few quick reminders as usual. First, this episode is produced by CrossFit Beyond the Whiteboard, the best workout tracking in the biz and the one I've been using since 2009. You can learn more about them at beyondthewhiteboard.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, please head over to iTunes to subscribe and consider giving it a rating. It really does make a difference in getting these episodes out to more listeners. I'm also always looking for inspiring stories to share. So if you or someone you know has used lifestyle to overcome a serious health challenge, please send your story to me at info@juliefouché.com. Finally, please remember that although I am now officially a doctor, this podcast is meant to share the experiences of individuals and does not provide medical advice. So with that, we'll get started with episode number 114 of Pursuing Health featuring Dr. Maude Dull. Welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm really excited to be here with Dr. Maude Dull. Thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is kind of cool.
So we're actually here at San Francisco CrossFit, which is near where you live now. And we first met at the CrossFit MD Level 1, which was back in which month?
I think it was in September. It was in the
sometime
fall,
in the fall. But I was really amazed by your story. And so I'm excited to kind of share that with our audience today.
Well, cool. Thank you.
So I thought maybe we could just start at the beginning with kind of what your life was like growing up, what you were interested in, and then eventually how you ended up moving towards medicine.
Okay. So basically, I grew up in San Francisco. My family is, was sort of the bohemian, not the hippie set because of their age. And so I had what I would consider a fairly normal childhood. And went to schools here, and I was always an active kid. I wanted to be an acrobat when I was growing up.
Oh, very cool.
I did gymnastics a little bit. No talent, but just things that, just keep moving and doing things. And was fairly active, especially the first 10 years of my life. In fact, I was kind of thinking about, growing up in the city and stuff like that. And I went to a elementary school called Second Community, which was about 1.5 miles away from our house. And my parents were like free range parents before free range was a thing. They didn't drive you to school. And I used to walk up this hill called Warren Drive every day to go to school, and it's a really high grade San Francisco hill, so I used to walk up that.
The hills here, I've only been here a few times, but I'm always amazed by the hills.
So
and it must have been uphill both ways, right? That's what our parents always used to say.
You had to go over a hill, so it was uphill both ways. So I was really, just by nature of getting around a city, as a young person, I was just an active child because there was no other opportunities. And then when I went into middle school, I started taking the bus to school. And that was about the age of 19. I was born in 1970, so that was in about 1980. And that was the same time that puberty hit, and that actually the recommendations for what people should be eating started to shift.
Very interesting.
And so we went from a fairly moderate to high fat diet, like a sort of normal human diet, to eating less and less fat and more carbohydrates as I was growing up, and more refined foods and stuff like that. And so I started taking the bus, eating donuts, and hitting adolescence. And it didn't have, things started to get much more difficult for me in that next 10 years. And I ballooned up.
What was your diet like prior to that? Like, were you eating a lot of fresh foods? Did your family cook at home a lot?
We cooked. We lived in actually, again, the sort of semi-hippie lifestyle. Like, we had a fairly communal household. Oh, nice. So we ate dinners together. We had, pretty varied diet. I remember like going and harvesting mussels at the beach with my family and stuff like that. So we had like that kind of diet. But as we got older, and my mom started to work as a nurse, she became a nurse practitioner eventually. But she was working as a nurse. She started working nights. And then there were a couple of those adverse childhood events that sometimes you experience when you're growing up. So my older brother, Byron, died very suddenly when I was 11 of something called hantavirus syndrome.
Wow.
Which was years before it was even discovered. He had been out in the Four Corners and ended up just getting pneumonia and just suddenly died.
Wow.
Which really devastated
You're
our
11
family.
years old. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then my parents didn't stay together throughout all of that. So between all of that, this overall stress of that childhood and then changing dietary expectations and everything like that, and probably some genetics, I became obese.
So in middle school was the first time when you really were overweight. Okay.
Yeah, and I wasn't one of those like childhood obesity kids. You know, like some kids are sort of born with that. Like it really hit me right around puberty, and I spent a lot of time battling that. In fact, probably about 30 years to battle that. So it didn't stop me from doing a lot of other things that I wanted to do. I always stayed active. I ran. I did sports. I played water polo in college. I loved moving around and stuff like that, but I was just never able to crack the diet code. And I was never good enough. And I was never really okay because
you always had that kind of weighing on you.
I was always the fat girl.
Yeah.
And it was horrible.
Was that like middle school obviously is a tough enough time as it is, and then high school, I mean, what was that experience like from the perspective of interacting with other kids and with friends and things like that?
Well, I mean, especially then, I mean, I think that it was worse than it would be now. I think that there was a lot less tolerance. There was a lot less compassion for people that are obese. I remember being teased and bullied. I remember being treated very poorly. I had some friends, but not a ton. And you couldn't find clothes. There was like no way to buy clothes.
Wow.
Like there just wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, there weren't clothes didn't come in larger sizes. So it was very demoralizing. It was very, very challenging. So, but I was still, you know, I was kind of an active kid and I was always doing stuff. I was, it's like a long story, but it was also during the HIV epidemic in San Francisco, kind of hit like during my late teens, and I volunteered working with people with AIDS and stuff like that. So
you still had a strong kind of outside of yourself sense of...
Yeah, I mean, I had like a sense of service, and I really liked helping people and taking care of people. So like I wasn't always just shut down. I mean, I was often doing stuff mostly despite, you know, what, you know, I perceived as like this major character flaw that I had. So I became somewhat interested in going into healthcare probably around that time. My mom had been a nurse, and then she moved into nurse practitioner. Okay. And so she was taking care of, she actually worked at the STD clinic in San Francisco.
What an interesting job.
So dinner table conversations were just absolutely humiliating.
Like, Mom, don't talk about that.
I'm like, I don't want to hear about it, Mom, please. So like I was really immersed in the healthcare environment at that time. Okay. So, you know, it made sense when I went to college. I went to UC Santa Cruz. We really, you know, like that, I kind of had an interest in healthcare and biology and stuff like that. When I got out of college, I really wasn't ready for medical school.
And what did you study, or what was your major in college?
I majored in biology. Okay. And so but I really wasn't ready for medical school. I sort of did a first pass at looking at, like, took my MCATs and thought about going in, and then realized, I think very appropriately, that I was just not mature enough. So I actually spent 4 years working in laboratories. I worked at UCSF. Okay. Doing just basic science as a lab tech for 4 years, and grew up a little bit. Did karate. You know, got my black belt. It was fun.
Oh, that's amazing.
You know, so I was able to do some really cool stuff like during that time. And then, ironically, apparently that 24 as an older applicant, and that's when I went and applied to medical school.
And they're like, oh, interesting. We need some diversity. And,
I was like,
perspective.
It's hilarious to me, though, that age would be considered adding diversity to any population.
Right. But it's amazing in those 4 years, the things that you learn and how much more mature you can become than coming straight from college.
So
how did you know that you were ready? You know, after 4 years, did you decide this is the time to do it?
I think that I had just spent some time really deciding that it was what I wanted to do. I had, explored being in the workforce and working with a biology major, with a biology degree, and where my career could go with that. And while I enjoyed the aspects of working in a research laboratory, I didn't really love the process, and I certainly did not want to be a postdoctoral fellow or, a principal investigator. None of that interested me whatsoever. So it made sense to sort of move into medicine at that time.
That makes sense.
So,
and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but kind of going through middle school, high school, college, this whole time period, always having this, I think you said, kind of lack, or this area where you didn't feel kind of confident about yourself, but yet you still did all of these things, and you didn't let that really hold you back from, going into medicine, getting a black belt in karate, all these things. What do you think it was about you or about your personality that that allowed you to keep doing those things and not let it kind of take over your whole life?
I'm just epically stubborn.
That makes sense.
And I probably get it from my mom, is just this ability to, no matter how many times you get knocked down, you just keep getting up. Even competing in judo or anything like that, it's sort of like, it's how well you take the fall matters more than whether you win the match.
Yes.
It's sort of like you get knocked down, you're going to get back up over and over and over and over again. So I had the mental reps of doing that just constantly. And that was really what I think built that, sort of work ethic in me and ability to just
not
trudge
give up.
along.
Yeah.
I didn't get into medical school the first year I applied. It took me 2 years to get in. Okay. So, I was, accustomed to failure and not, before growth mindset was a growth mindset,
right,
it was
that's what you had.
A growth mindset. So
that's awesome. And it's cool that you said you think that comes from your mom, comes from maybe your upbringing of seeing that as an example in your life, and then being able to embody that as you go through different challenges.
Yes.
Okay, so you get into medical school, and where did you go? You moved to...
So I moved to Albany,
New York.
I got into Albany Medical College, which I was really excited about because it was medical school.
Yes.
Not a California school, but it was medical school. I was like, I'll take it.
Yes.
So I piled everything into my little POS car and drove across the country by myself.
Amazing.
And
Did you see some sights along the way, or was it a quick drive?
It was a fairly quick drive.
Okay.
I think it was 6 days or something.
Okay. It was pretty quick.
Well, when you have everything you have in your car, it's kind of hard to hang out.
It's pretty jam-packed.
And I'd never done that before. So I drove across the country and started at Albany Medical College, which is a fairly traditional medical school. Your first 2 years are sitting in a classroom and doing just basic science and then, pathophysiology. And then the second 2 years are your clinical stuff. I was still active. I actually loved medical school. I'm weird. But because I had been working so hard in my research laboratory, in a real job.
In a work environment,
that to me, the idea of just sitting there and having someone just keep me learning and telling me what to do, and then I wasn't responsible for the mouses or the colony or pouring agars or anything like that. It was just wonderful. I was I would look at people that were stressing out, and I was like, I don't get it.
This is great. Yeah, that's such great perspective, right? And if you hadn't taken that time, you wouldn't have had it. But I think the same. I think back to college or med school, and how great great it was, but in the time you don't realize how nice it is just to have, how little responsibility you actually have.
Oh God,
like
no.
You're just there to learn. That's it.
Yeah, especially like compared to as you move forward in the medical
medicine,
career.
right?
So, and I had a lot of fun too because I went pretty deep into judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu at the same time. So
awesome.
I was doing a lot of, I remember like the first year of medical school was so much fun because I'd go and, I would work out at the judo and then I would like go to the dissection lab or the library afterwards. And I remember having just all of this energy, like, I would like mental train, clarity, and then I was like, okay, now I'm going to go do this. And it was a lot of fun. So
that's awesome. And then as you're kind of going through medical school, how did you end up deciding on your specialty or your residency?
I don't think it was, people seem to make like really conscious decisions and I don't think it was really that well thought out, to be honest. I think a lot of times in healthcare when you're in training, at least for me, I imprint or you do what the people you like are doing, or you do the thing that like seems the most interesting when you're in medical school, and it's very hard to necessarily be exposed to something different than that. Right. So I had rotated through a lot of internal medicine and pediatrics and had a lot of internal medicine pediatrics combined residents during my medical school years, and they were cool. And I also actually had a really good rotation in family medicine. And I initially thought that I wanted to do primary care, and made a decision to do internal medicine and pediatrics, and even took out a primary care loan.
Oh, interesting.
During that time, because I was like against the advice of my advisor, because they were like, you really lock yourself into this, and I was like, all right, okay. But I was really convinced I wanted to do primary care, and at that time, like that I was very passionate about getting people healthy and stuff like that. So
very cool. And then kind of take us through what was happening with, you said you were very active in judo and jiu-jitsu during that time, but what was going on with your diet and kind of your weight story during that period of life?
I was kind of like a recidivist at Weight Watchers.
Okay.
So I was roller coastering a lot. I would go way up and down and up and down. I actually dislocated my foot my fourth year of medical school, that like rolling in Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Very painful.
Yeah, I had a little incident with a young man that I was like, it wasn't bad, but it was just, we were rolling and my foot got caught in the mat he pushed it over. And initially I thought it was like a tib fib, but what actually happened was my calcaneus ended up getting medially dislocated.
Oh my gosh.
So it was really, and it was a big deal because I was actually competing more and more intensely in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time. So, I was kind of like, I was too heavy to fight with women. So like I would actually kind of go into the men's groups in my weight class because that was the only place I could compete. Because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and stuff, those weight class things like heavyweight is like, it was ridiculous. I was way too heavy to be competing with, women, and so and there was never anyone for me to play with, so I was always competing with men, and so I like dislocated my foot, and all of a sudden I couldn't, it was a big injury. It was like 2 surgeries.
Oh my gosh.
And so it took forever to recover from, and really slowed me down a lot. And then I went into internship, and I was introduced to the concept of the drug lunch.
Oh gosh.
And so I got things. And I had moved from Albany, New York to Buffalo, and I did my internal medicine pediatrics residency in Buffalo, New York, which is not the world's healthiest diet. So at that point, like my weight kind of just went up and stayed up at that point. So.
And this injury was towards the end of medical school?
Yeah, it was my 4th year of medical school.
Okay.
It was not optimal.
Not the best time. And I think intern year, for everyone is a very stressful time. And like you mentioned, oftentimes, I mean, you don't have money. 2, you don't have time to kind of get your own food and prepare your own food. And 3, most of the programs are providing some sort of food for the, that's kind of part of it. And often it's very unhealthy food options.
Yeah, I think another really important thing is that, you don't have friends necessarily, going into
a brand new place.
I moved to, I actually was in a long-term relationship with my partner of the time, was completing a sort of public health requirement or public health commitment.
Okay.
So she was actually working in Plattskill, and so she was a physician's assistant, and so she was finishing like a 2-year commitment there.
Oh gosh!
So the first year of my internship, like I didn't know anyone in Buffalo. Like I had no friends, and so I just worked, and that was another aspect of it. So and you just knuckle through. You're not sleeping,
right? Yeah. Not to mention the lack of sleep and the high stress and all the impact that has as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it was New York State, so we did have some work hours rules, more so than other places at the time. But it's still a pretty brutal schedule. It's still 80 hours a week. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah, but it's still, I think, much better today than it probably was at that time.
Yeah, there was less respect for sleep or the importance of sleeping and stuff like that.
Right. So. It was, someone else I was talking to saying, it was almost like this badge of honor, like, oh, I stayed up for 36 hours and I feel fine.
Yeah. And I was still, the one thing I did do is I maintained relationships with people in martial arts.
Okay.
I actually went to Kintora Judo Club. They're wonderful. But I used to work out with them. And I remember I'd sometimes come off an ER shift and, it'd be 3 or 4 in the morning and they actually gave me the code to get in there and I would sleep on the couch to make sure I didn't miss the morning workout. So I was pretty committed to still moving.
That's
and
good.
My philosophy in medical school and in training was always if you stop moving, if you're not exercising during this time in your life, you'll never be able to keep it going.
That's a great philosophy.
As you move along, because it doesn't get easier.
Right. That's great that you had that insight so early. I've heard that a lot from people saying, because going through medical training, you can always think, oh, at the next stage, I'll be able to do this. Or, once I'm attending, I'll have time for this. And if you keep putting things off, it's true, you're probably never going to do them. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of those, it's the difference between being process-based and goal-based in the way that you approach education or training or anything like that, which is I think it's super important for trainees, medical students, residents, interns, fellows, to realize that they have to at least try in some way not to put their life and their health on hold while they're training up. Because this is where you get your habits that are the most important habits that will carry you through those first 2-3 years of being an attendant, which is a really hard time. And you realize what it is. So
right. Oh, goodness. So some of those habits for you were, maintaining your relationships in martial arts and regularly still working out. At what point, so kind of you go through residency, was there ever a point, people talk about different breaking points or a point where you realize, okay, something has to change or...
Oh, I didn't get that till much later in my life. I sort of went through my residency. I ended up being in Internal Medicine and Pediatrics residency, which I'm sure you have an idea of this, and I'll explain it, is a combined program where you board certify in both internal medicine and pediatrics. So it takes 4 years, and in those 4 years of training, because you're doing a full residency load for each of the professions, internal medicine and pediatrics, we spend a lot of times in critical care units. So neonatal intensive care units, cardiovascular intensive care units, any kind of unit, I rotated through it and I spent time in it. And I found that I really loved that environment. I love the excitement. I love the physiology. And so I became really interested in critical care. to the point where I was like, I don't even know if I want to do primary care.
Right.
And then what happened is that I was actually recruited by the pediatric intensive care unit in my hospital. Like the faculty there recruited me to come do a fellowship with them in pediatric critical care with the intention that they wanted more people on their faculty that had internal medicine training. Because one thing with pediatrics and pediatric critical care is that sometimes we have patients that are 20, 22, 23, and they start to get out of people's comfort zones for pediatrics.
Right.
So I ended up getting kind of recruited. I really, really wanted to do this. My mother, who is very supportive, took another mortgage out on our house to pay off my primary care loan.
Wow.
And I paid her back. One nice thing about growing up in San Francisco is sometimes you can do that. So she took a line of credit or a second mortgage, and we refinanced that one loan.
Wow.
And I went into critical care. So I did a pediatric critical care fellowship. So I did a total of 7 years of postgraduate after medical school training.
That's just incredible.
Yeah, I look back at it and I'm like, how did I do that?
Right. It's just so crazy to think about. Even now I think about the friends I graduated from college with and how established they are in their careers, and thinking that I'm just, about to start my career. And it's so, medicine is just such an interesting profession where you spend so much time training. And there's so many different, now especially, there's so many different things to learn. You're never going to learn it all. And it's so specialized in many ways.
Yeah. If you think about it, I didn't get out of medical school until I was 30. I didn't get out of postgraduate training until I was 37. So I actually, after you finish all of that, after I finished all that, I have a very short career.
Yeah. Relatively
speaking compared to, the people that start really early and know exactly what they're going to do.
Right. And then you have loans to pay back from school and from your mom's mortgage and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's that's
just the price of doing business.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your early career? Did you go directly into pediatric ICU?
I did. I went and actually did a kind of a combination of stuff. So I worked in both an adult ICU, so I grandfathered in with my internal medicine credentialing, and did some critical care work on the adult side. Okay. And I also worked in a pediatric critical care unit. And I did that for a few years before going full-time into pediatric critical care. Okay. And on the adult side, it really gave me tremendous insight into what's killing us. Because I would really work with people that were dying from the end stages of chronic disease. So I would see people in renal failure. I'd see people with strokes. And in a medical intensive care unit, our mortality rate was about 30%.
It's high.
And so really you could argue, because we're pretty proactive with our palliative care practice and stuff like that, but the reality is that, there was a mortality rate of 30%, probably 50% of the people that came through that unit didn't really benefit from critical care because they were so chronically ill.
So far down that track.
Yeah. So we could keep them alive, put them on a ventilator, get them off the ventilator, get them trached, all of that stuff, but we weren't really necessarily
dramatically changing their quality of life. Yeah.
Whereas in pediatrics, the mortality rate is about 2.5% for critical care, because children, when they get critically ill, generally are getting critically ill from either some chronic stuff, but also from acute events or acute illnesses. So pneumonia or something like that. And they can really go through a lot and make really significant recovery. So I ended up shifting more into going just straight critical care for several years, just because it was a little more rewarding, less burning out in.
Yeah, definitely.
And it was challenging to maintain expertise in two huge fields.
Right. So. That's really an interesting perspective, though, because you think, you see patients, or you see people maybe even on a regular hospital floor in an outpatient office who have these multiple chronic conditions, and you can see them starting to go down that path, but you're really seeing this is kind of the end stage when it's almost too late to make a lot of a lot of impact or a lot of change on their quality of life or their mortality, really.
Really, at that point, mostly what you can do is guide families towards more palliative solutions, and make sure that the person's going to be comfortable, and try to avoid doing things that are not going to benefit the patient. So, for instance, if someone has a huge stroke, then really having very serious early discussions with the family about end of life. And we used to, because of very proactive programs that we had in that unit in particular, which I really got a lot of skills from, I've averaged about 3 family meetings a day.
Wow.
Where I would sit down with families and say,
that's very emotionally exhausting.
These are your options and they're not good.
Yeah.
And this was done a long time ago.
Did you see people, or did you have, maybe a rare story of someone who is up against this, like facing their own mortality and realizing, gosh, I wish I would have made these decisions earlier. Or I would have realized this is what it would be like. I don't know if that's even something that you would encounter in the ICU setting, but I think some of the stories that stick with me just from early in residency are people who, maybe have a heart attack or maybe have some sort of small wake-up call where they're like, oh, I didn't realize that all of these decisions I was making on a daily basis in my life, this is what it would be like. We all try to imagine that we're just invincible and everything's going to be fine.
You get some of that, definitely with this younger population. I'd say people in their 40s and 50s that come through the ICU with issues might have that sort of, I jokingly say, the come to Moses about it. But I think a lot of times too, like it's such a traumatic and shocking experience for people to experience critical illness, and there's so much PTSD from it. There's so much sedation and delirium that I think it's very hard. If I'm only doing critical care, it's hard for me to see people getting insight from their experiences because usually they're just stunned. Right. And the families are stunned. I did see, a lot of families that would be like, we're not going to have this happen to us. When they would see the consequences of some of that suffering.
Yeah. So. Wow. So then take us into kind of how you came to your breaking point or your come to Moses moment, maybe, where you realized, okay, something has to change in my own life.
Well, let's see. I went through a divorce. Okay. And I was working full-time faculty in pediatric critical care at this point. I had sort of stepped away from doing adult critical care, mostly to sort of not be straddling and to also sort of define my practice a little bit more clearly. I was very involved in patient safety. I got a master's in patient safety leadership. I'm really interested in sort of how we mess up when we're taking care of patients. And I realized in the year after my divorce that I had, moved into like an apartment, lived the bachelor life, and my health was not going in a very good direction, and realized that with really the sort of stress of my job that I really couldn't, in the place that I was at, I felt like I couldn't really make any traction. I'd been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time, and I also started doing CrossFit right around that area. So I sort of like flirted with CrossFit a few times.
And how did you hear about it, or what attracted you to it, to try it?
It looked hard.
You're like, oh, this looks hard. I'll try it.
This looks hard. So I had initially started doing some CrossFit and learning some of the motions. And I really enjoyed working with kettlebells. The reality is that when you are, for me, being obese as long as I was obese, I had really done some permanent damage to my knees long before even medical school.
And what was your weight like at that time?
I was over 200. 210. I was hovering anywhere between 210 and 230, 240. I peaked at 240. But so I had some valgus deformities in my knees, and I also had a lot of like chondromalacia, which moved rapidly to arthritis. I don't know when. So I always had knee problems and sort of difficulty like getting some of the motions in CrossFit. And so like I tried it out for a while, and then it sort of hurt, and then I stopped, and I was doing jiu-jitsu, so I thought I was okay. And then I moved, then I went back into it after my divorce. I found there was a gym that was a little closer, and I worked with a CrossFit coach there that did some squat work with me and some other stuff, and I really enjoyed it. Ran a Tough Mudder.
Oh, cool.
You know, like it was really fun.
Yeah.
But one of the things was that I realized that like I really couldn't, and this is going to sound so shallow, I couldn't really get workouts in because I was working 60 hours a week. I was in an academic position, which was very high in terms of patient service load. I was covering a lot of nights. I was always tired. I was stressed out. My diet was horrible.
Yeah.
I was drinking a lot. You know, and I just wasn't living a very healthy lifestyle. And so I thought, oh, it must be my job.
Yeah.
Couldn't have anything to do with my diet or any other habits. But
well, they're all connected, I suppose. Did you ever have any other kind of negative health consequences like high blood pressure, cholesterol problems, or anything like that? No.
When I was a teenager, I had pseudotumor cerebri.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was from the obesity. And I was not treated kindly by the medical establishment. That's a condition that's associated with obesity. And so I had some visual losses from that and things.
Wow.
But I really wasn't getting, I mean, my blood pressure's always been pretty normal.
Okay.
You know, like it's mostly orthopedic for me and psychologic, I think, that was doing damage. So I got this sort of wild hair that I would leave Buffalo.
Okay.
And so
if it's the job that's causing the problem, let's just get a new job.
Yeah, like let's the geography can fix anything, right? So
starting
I was
over.
like started cruising the you know, there's professional websites. So I was looking at job listings, and there was something in Huntsville, Alabama.
Wow.
And I was like, So
sounds like a fun city. I actually spent 1 week there in college on an alternate spring break. It was a good week.
Yeah. Did you go to the Space Center?
Oh yeah, of course.
Of course.
There wasn't much else to do there.
It's got some great CrossFit. So.
Yeah.
But so literally, I was like, I'm gonna leave martial arts because like I'm not gonna run. Like I had reached a sort of level in jiu-jitsu that like, in order to keep training, I would probably have to open a school or teach classes. And I was like, I didn't really want to do that.
Yeah.
I actually didn't really want to do jiu-jitsu anymore because it was not, I mean, it was, you get good enough at it. Like you're just standing around.
You're not really chasing anything anymore.
Not chasing anything. So I sent in my CV and they called me and they recruited me and I went down there and I was like, they were like, well, what are you looking for? And I was like, I need a CrossFit gym.
Yeah. This is important.
So I went down and did my interviews. I actually was coming off a torn hamstring.
Okay.
But I literally interviewed there and then went to 2 or 3 different CrossFit gyms and like rolled into CrossFit Huntsville and I was like,
can I see myself here? Yeah.
I see myself here. These people are cool. This is okay. And it was like, the other thing is like CrossFit in the South is really different from like how it is in a highly urbanized environment.
Yeah.
So like all of a sudden like this big, huge gym with
right,
like all this
space
equipment.
Outside. Yeah.
You know, people are out there in the sun. I was like, it doesn't snow here. This is awesome.
Sounds great.
So I went to Huntsville and started my job there. I was working in a small community-based pediatric intensive care unit. You do 72 hours on, but not in-house. So you would take call from home and come in and take care of patients in a much lower acuity than I was used to, but still, you know, can get dicey.
Right. Still in ICU.
Still in ICU, still dealing with really sick kids.
Yeah.
And started to really seriously train in CrossFit.
Okay.
And just now I have all this time to train, right? I have like money. I have everything I need in order to be like really fit. And I'm still fat.
Like something's not adding up.
I'm like, oh, what's wrong with me? You know, like I'm going to CrossFit like 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I'm still fat. You know, so I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So at the time, the head coach there was Dennis Berry. He's in Oklahoma now. He's a great coach. And I was like, you know, I come in, I'm really dedicated, and I can't seem to crack this code. And he was like, you need to do precision nutrition.
Oh, like we need to look at your diet.
Yeah, you know, but it wasn't just like, because I like knew, you know, like I'm a physician, like I've done Weight Watchers, I've, you know, read The Zone, you know, like I tried so many different diets and I just couldn't mentally hack them. That like, you know, I would lose weight and then I'd gain back and I'd do more every single time. So I did precision nutrition for a year and like I melted away.
Wow.
It was amazing. And I was totally freaking out the whole time because it was like, it's all habit based, you know? So like for the first 2 weeks they're like, just take 5 minutes and, you know, make time for yourself. And I like literally for the first 2 weeks did not understand the instructions because it was so alien. You know, so that was sort of how it kind of really sort of jump started in. So I really went from like, I think like 240 when I was there. It was really bad. And then at the same time, I also started working with a counselor.
Okay.
There was a guy named Matt Miller who is at our gym. He's just a nice guy and he's a social worker and he's like does performance coaching. And I was like, this is the guy that's going to help me get the mindset that I need in order to be a great athlete. And I got in there and I sat down and talking with him with like, you know, like all this performance coaching because in Alabama, if you seek mental health services, you have to report them to the state board.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, we're going to do performance coaching. I'm going to pay extra money for this.
Yeah.
So that I don't have to report it because I certainly don't have any mental illness.
Right. This is just purely about performance.
And, you know, professionally, I don't want to, you know, deal with any of these issues because there's a lot of stigma in the profession about this. And of course, you know, I'm working with Matt and he's like, well, let's talk about your drinking. Yeah. And I was like, that's not on the table.
Like, that's not part of this at all.
There's no problem with that. I just like wine. It turned out that, you know, over, you know, several years, my alcohol consumption had gone up significantly to the point where it was impairing my ability. Not that I was having any trouble at work, not that I ever got a DWI or really any impairment issues professionally. But what it did was it completely arrested and delayed my ability to grow in terms of losing weight or in terms of athletically or even emotionally. It just sort of arrested me. And I had to stop drinking. And when I was able to do that, which was not easy to accept, when I was able to do that, like things just took off. And it was totally awesome.
Wow, that's amazing.
So,
what was that process like? Like,
humiliating.
Did you always just kind of work with him, or did you find any other resources to be helpful or support?
I worked with him. You know, mostly with him. You know, it takes a while to sort of like change a mindset. And it took a long time for me to really understand and accept that, you know, it's all kind of the same brain chemistry that has like a lot of effects on me, both good and bad. You know, the reason to go to CrossFit and, you know, work out until you're like a puddle of sweat is the same reason that, you know, I liked to run, you know, codes in the ICU. It's the same adrenaline rush. It's the same dopamine receptors that get bathed. And I had to really sort of begin to accept that, you know, both professionally and personally that I needed to tone down almost all stimulus for a really long time in order to get healthy. And that was hard. It was very challenging.
It's true, like you say, constantly in that sort of fight or flight mode with everything that you're doing.
Like I thought like the way to blow off steam, you know, after like maybe having some horrible case in the ICU is to go do Fran. Right.
Let's just get more adrenaline.
Like, let's just deplete the last of the adrenals. Let's have nothing left.
Oh, goodness. It's actually interesting because I've noticed a trend, a lot of, like, as I was rotating through my intern year, through a lot of different hospital specialties, I noticed the ER and the ICU setting having a high percentage of physicians, nurses, you know, generally people working there that did CrossFit. It seemed like that was the areas where I met the most people who also did CrossFit, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who are adrenaline junkies. There's people that really just enjoy that process, but you have to titrate it like anything else. Like, chocolate's good too, but you can't eat it every day.
Exactly. Wow. So what are some of the ways that you were able to help yourself balance that and get yourself into more of a parasympathetic tone once in a while?
It's a total practice for me.
Yeah.
So, in stopping drinking, I learned to meditate. So I started meditating first with Headspace and maybe
Love Headspace.
5 minutes a day, like barely touching on it.
Yeah.
So I started a meditation practice, and that helped. And then I actually had to renegotiate my relationship with CrossFit. So, I was one of those people that I had success. I'd gone from being, obese to being pretty much almost the same weight I am right now. And I was like, we're going all the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to train 2 hours a day. I'm going to just go,
more is always better.
If changing my habits are good, then counting macros will be better, I said, I knew I had understood what the price of admission was for those kind of behaviors, but I wanted to see how far can we take it?
Yeah.
So I really sort of pushed it almost too far for a little while. And then eventually came sort of back to the middle when I moved back to San Francisco. So after 3 years in the South, my mom turned 80 and I was like, you know what? It's probably time to come back to San Francisco. UC San Francisco actually had a great job that was offered. So one of the things I did was I pivoted away from doing straight pediatric critical care. I now work in a step-down unit, which is I work with chronically critically ill kids or chronically ill children, or medically complex kids. But what I love about this job is I get to work with pediatric intensivists. I work with pediatric residents and this patient population that's very challenging. And I work days. I don't do nights anymore.
That's huge.
So that was a big thing. It was I really, at some point, and I think Ben Bergeron always talks about this in his podcast, which is a very salient point, which is that sometimes you can't make that silk purse out of a sow's ear. Sometimes you just have to, if you really want to be healthy, you have to make some hard decisions. And for me, that pivot was one of those hard decisions. So I showed up here at this gym actually, a year and a half ago or so. It's actually a little bit more than a year ago. Underweight, overtrained. A little crazy.
Yeah. I just want to do more CrossFit.
I just want to do more CrossFit. And, Kelly was like, He's like, you don't know how to squat. I was like, what do you mean? I've been working on it for years, and the reality is that a full dip squat is really not accessible to me. And it took me a long time to realize that and to really accept that, I don't have to be so crazed, pursuing, chasing anything more in CrossFit than I do anywhere else to have some balance. So, when you talk about this parasympathetic stuff, I learned a lot of breath technique. I deepened the meditation practice. And I had 6 months off between the time I got here to San Francisco and that I started my new job. And every physician should have a mid-career break of at least 6 months.
Yeah, that sounds like such a good idea.
So I took that 6 months off and learned some yoga and started developing a yoga practice. And so that's working very well for me.
That's amazing.
So what I do now, I meditate every morning. Even if it's just 5 minutes, it's the first thing I do. I make a cup of coffee. I cheat. Drink my coffee, I sit down and I meditate, and I might drink a little coffee while I meditate, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting quietly for at least the first 15 to 20 minutes of my morning. And then I go about my business. So that's nice. And then I train in CrossFit. I train about 4 to 5 days, mostly 4 days. And for me, I'm 49 years old. I find that it works better if I kind of batch. So I'll train 2 to 3, maybe 4 days straight, and then I take 3 days off, and I flip. So more yoga on the days that I'm not doing CrossFit, and more CrossFit on the days that I'm not doing yoga. And I find that sort of having a split week gives me actually the recovery I need. I can't just for me, if I'm a little bit beat up from training, then taking one day off doesn't do anything for me at all.
Yeah, you need a little more time.
Yeah. So.
And what is your work schedule like then? Are you working mostly Monday through Friday, or is it
it's a mix.
Yeah.
Since I'm in an academic position, we do 20 weeks of service a year.
Okay.
So service week and a non-service week, as you probably know, are very different schedules. When I'm on service, I work in the hospital from 7 a.m. till 5:30.
Okay.
And that's usually pretty intense. Sometimes I'll go to my box. The place where I train now they have multiple locations. So one of the locations is closer to my hospital.
Okay.
So sometimes I'll go there and I'll train. I really limit that to no more than 2 to 3 times because I find that it just pushes into my sleep.
Right. Especially when you're on that service week where you're getting more of that adrenaline and that intensity at work.
Yeah. And there's sort of more interaction.
Yeah.
So there's less quiet time if I'm going to a box where it's, the music's blasting and everything like that. The other aspect of that, which is odd, but it's very San Francisco, is that I don't have a car. So one of the ways I, keep myself active and busy is I'm have an electric bike.
That's amazing.
I bike commute all the time. So I've already put in 1,000 miles on that thing.
That's awesome.
So one of the considerations is also the neighborhood that my hospital and the gym are in is one of the most congested neighborhoods in the city. So sometimes it's just not safe to ride my bike home from that area at that time. So I might change the timing of my workouts. So that's sort of the work week, and I'll deload if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
During those weeks, and then when I'm not working clinically, I'm usually doing a lot of research, preparing talks, going to meetings, sort of the things that academicians do. And in those cases, I have a lot more control over my time, and I usually train at 8 in the morning for 4 days. I don't think I really should do 5. Sometimes I'll push it because I'm having fun.
Right.
And the gym I'm at actually has, Flagship has really, getting around the city is what makes, it's very challenging to get to a CrossFit gym in San Francisco because it's parking and transportation and everything like that are a real barrier to just getting in there. So one thing, so I've bounced around a lot of different gyms. They've all been really good. Everyone here is great. But one of the reasons I go to this gym is because they have a couple locations. One's closer to my house and one's closer to my work. They also have programming that's much more humane for people that are not competitors. So it's much more, I think, in keeping with, what we learned in our MDL1 about sort of what CrossFit, that you're going to have that strength piece and you're going to have a Metcom, but the Metcoms are short enough that they're not totally destroying you all the time.
Right. There's a lot of balance.
Yeah. So in the past, in programming, which is very good programming, the purpose of the programming was to prepare people for the open.
Right.
And that was sort of when I came up in CrossFit for several years. It's open, you're going to do the open, you're going to do the open. And I loved doing that. I loved being able to do the open RX and stuff like that. But at the same time, it was sort of putting your ladder up against the wrong wall.
Right. Right. What are your real goals? And then.
Yeah. So the gyms that I go to, the gyms here in the city, are tend to cater more to the population in the city, which are people that, as one of the coaches says, that they just work really hard and they want to beat everyone on the slopes skiing.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's sort of and the attitude in CrossFit around here is go out and play. So it's get an e-bike and, because of my knees, it allows me to bicycle anywhere in the city and move around and go do things. So one of the things that I'm training for now, instead of just training because, I want a better Fran time or something. Right. Not that I'll ever RX Fran again in my life, but that's a different story. Is I'm going to Bhutan in the fall, and we're going to be trekking.
That's amazing.
So I want to be able to get up and down the hills. More importantly, I want to be able to survive the squat toilets.
Right. That is, yes, a very important variable.
So there's functional fitness right there.
Right.
So like that's the kind of stuff that I try to move training towards.
That's amazing. And it's so important to think about, why are we doing this in the first place, right? And how many people that are like you said, chasing maybe a Fran time or chasing a certain back squat. And it's like, so why is that important? Is it, just to achieve that goal, or is it because of you want to be able to be independent as you age, or do you want to be able to go out and ski with your kids, or whatever, the real reasons are that you are in here in the gym doing CrossFit.
Yeah. But I mean, if when I was at my heaviest and starting to lose weight or something like that, I was not motivated by my longevity. I wanted to be a better CrossFitter. Yeah. That's why I lost weight. Yeah. And so it has its place. Right. Definitely. The competitive aspects of it and that intensity and that sort of getting into it really was my muse. That was, I was not trying to lose weight. I wanted to get pull-ups. And I wanted to... Yeah. I wanted to be able to do the things that people were doing, so. Which
is another, a great motivator, where you're placing that goal more on, being able to do things rather than losing weight or a certain number on the scale, which I think is a big shift for most people, and why people spend so much time yo-yoing, and is they're focusing on just a certain weight rather than, what can I do? Can I get a pull-up? Can I run faster? Things like that.
Yeah. And I think it's especially in our culture, the CrossFit culture, where there's such a premium placed on leanness and, like we look at the exemplar athletes, like you and, who are just so amazing, can do all of these amazing things. And, it gives you like this delusion, first of all, that I can do these same things if I was just 15% body fat,
right.
Which is, of course, patently untrue. But
it's that.
But a nice little illusion, that you can do that. But what I can do is be as healthy as possible. And now as I'm moving, I turned 49 last week. So
happy birthday.
Now as I'm moving into that, the beginning of the second half of my life, right? It's sort of like, why do I even want to do this? What's the point of having that longevity? I'm child free. So what am I moving towards? And what I look towards is, how can I help other people? And how do we, in the profession of medicine and in CrossFit and in the gym communities and like that, really support people in being healthier. And there's so many opportunities to do that. One reasons why I love doing healthcare, I love doing medicine, is you just never run out of chances to help people. Yeah. But what I find is that, sort of like, kind of get older, you're like, what's my legacy? And it's like, as much as it is the patients that I've taken care of, and, a lot of parents that are parents because of the work that my team has done, that they're still parents. And I think that's really, amazing. But the other thing that, as I'm moving into my career at UCSF and being able to be more in a teaching role is, what do I teach the next generation of physicians? And the reality is that not everyone gets to be in primary care. Not everyone gets to be like functional medicine and sort of live that dream. A lot of us are going to be doing healthcare in hospitals and taking care of the sickest patients in really the sickest environment, because hospitals are, it's hideously sick environments.
People are still going to be very sick.
Props to UCSF. It's super. Like, if you've got to work somewhere, like I walked into the cafeteria the other day and they had these like crates of oranges there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oranges are 50 cents. So you can buy an orange for 50 cents there. So they're trying.
Yeah.
But, it's a difficult lifestyle. And so when I take these young physicians that are coming into training, a lot of what we talk about is, well, how are you dealing with this stress? And like I'll come into their room, like the resident work room, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, why is there all this candy in here?
That's amazing.
I'm like, is this the best way to deal with your stress? I mean, do you realize what you're doing to your dopamine systems? Like, whereas every time you're stressed, you guys hit the, chief resident's candy jar.
Right.
like, is that how you want to learn to cope with stuff? You know, and if they do it, they do it. We can't, you know, we can't fix that.
Right. But that's amazing that you're bringing it up as someone that is in a position of leadership and that's teaching them, because so often it's those people who are bringing in the candy or who are bringing in donuts every morning for their team or things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a place for that.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, you know, like food is one of the ways that we build community and, you know, but nothing should be so difficult in a resident's life that the only way that they can be happy is to be able to get a handful of M&Ms.
Right.
So, you know, that's a conversation that we have not infrequently, and it's actually consistent with the mission of my hospital, which is great.
That's amazing.
So I work in a hospital that doesn't sell sugared sodas. Like, they have juice, but that's it. You know, they don't, you know, there's no... They actually have, like, most sweet things that you can buy in the cafeteria, for instance, are in normal serving sizes, small servings.
That's amazing.
So there's plenty of bad choices, but at the same time, you can tell that there's sort of a culture that tries to stay away from, you know, just feeding their employees horrible food.
How has, we talked a lot about sort of how your exercise routine has evolved, but how has your diet and focus on nutrition changed?
Oh, well, I have moved out of the macro sphere fairly recently. When I got to San Francisco, I was actually, I think I was like 160 pounds, which is 10 pounds lighter than I am now.
Okay.
And I was underweight, and I had never been underweight. I didn't even know what underweight was.
Right. Like, this isn't even something I've had to think about before.
No perspective on it whatsoever. It's probably actually almost a little cognitively off from that. And I was experiencing night sweats and some early menopausal symptoms, probably from that and from the stress of just everything. So I gained, and I actually overshot a little bit. So then I went back into the macro world for a while, and it's been very helpful. So, but I've kind of sort of hit over the last few weeks. I've just been like, I'm done. Turning 49. I'm not doing this anymore. There's no more weight goals. We're out. It's going to be based on how I feel. And so for the last 3 weeks and kind of moving into it over time, I've moved much more towards like the Kate Shanahan, like human diet. Okay. Which is something that's pretty strongly, you know, endorsed around this gym and that, which is that, you know, really have a human diet. Which sounds, it ends up being very eerily similar to, you know, eat meats and vegetables, you know, blah, blah, blah. So
eat what we're supposed to eat.
Yeah. So which is really just, you know, meats and vegetables. I have some carbs. I'm not afraid of carbs. I'll eat them when I want to. I eat a lot of fruit and I eat about 3 meals a day and a snack. And I don't really deprive myself of fat. And I thought I was going to like gain weight and I haven't. And I feel great. And I'm working out great. My joints feel good. So it's really nice.
That's amazing. So. What was it like for you then, or what kind of drew you to attend the CrossFit MDL1 back in the fall, and what was that experience like for you?
Wow. Well, you know, I heard about a CrossFit MDL1 and I was going to like get in on it. Yeah. Because I love CrossFit so much. So, you know, I had joined the CrossFit Physicians Facebook site, and I really just kind of wanted to get more into the CrossFit community, more interested in sort of where things were going, especially as we were moving. CrossFit as an organization is moving away from the sort of games mentality into more of a health mentality. And I remember saying a lot of times, like in Huntsville when I was training, you know, that CrossFit is wasted on the fit. You know, like it really felt like, you know, if we're training for the game, you know, training for the open, or people are training for the games and stuff like that, and there's this huge emphasis on this elite fitness that I was like, it's kind of wasted on people that already have it, you know, whereas like there's people that like me that needed it so bad, you know, that had to sort of, you know, we were embraced and brought into it, but not the way we would be embraced now. You know, we had to sort of, you had to break in.
You had a lot more barriers to come up against.
Yeah, you had to break in a little bit still. So, I always that was always one of the things that I said, CrossFit was wasted on the fit. So I would, when, I sort of saw this shift going on and heard some of the stuff that Coach Glassman was talking about, I was like, you know what, I want to get in on this. I want to check it out. And, I was like, well, it's sort of ridiculous because I don't do primary care. So how am I going to move the needle at all on this whole issue of health? But I signed up.
Yeah. And actually, interestingly, I think the majority of doctors who attend are not related to primary care at all. They're doing something. They're surgical specialists. They're working in the hospital. Yeah, it's a huge portion of the doctors that have been involved.
Yeah, so I signed up, and I had a pretty good idea. I knew it was going to be a level 1 training, and I was like, oh God, at the time, I think I was actually a little bit over my weight. I felt really overweight at the time. I felt like a fraud. I was like, oh God, I'm going to be that fat one in there. And, and I couldn't squat. I had been tooled or trained by Kelly and the trainers here, which was to never squat any lower than my feet would allow me to stay into the ground. For me, that was about 10 degrees or 15 degrees at that time. I couldn't, because I didn't have ankle mobility and I had both of my patellae are gone. So there was just, I was like,
you're like,
I remember,
gosh, what am I
was like, I'm here. I was like, I can't squat. Basically I'm an adaptive athlete. Like everyone else in the world, we're all adaptive.
Right. We're all.
So I was like, I'm going to go there and they're going to do Fran because I knew they always do Fran. And I was like, oh, and it was great. It was really good to learn about the methodology. It was good to sort of see where CrossFit was going. It's good to meet Coach Glassman and thank him for getting something that would together having this CrossFit thing that was finally the thing that gave me the motivation to make such huge changes in my life.
It's amazing. What was it like to thank him for that?
It was a little misty.
Yeah. I remember the first time I met him was after a regionals event in 2012, but that was the first time I met him. And I remember the first thing I told him was thank you for changing my life, because it completely, CrossFit completely transformed my life. And he's always so humble and doesn't want to take credit. He's like, oh, well, it was you that did it and blah, 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 blah. But it just felt good to be able to say that to him.
It did feel good. It was fun because we were at the ranch. So, we got to explore, run around the ranch a little bit.
Yeah.
Sort of got to do some pull-ups on the pull-up rigs up there. It was like, oh, this is really
pretty
cool.
Neat.
It was pretty geeky, oh, look, there's the hopper,
Right.
So, I got to nerd out a little bit. So, that was fun. And meeting you was sort of that was a pretty big deal.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. And what, you mentioned a little bit before, kind of the lessons that you try to pass on to your residents, but what advice would you give to someone who's right now going through medical training or going to be starting their medical training?
I think things are a little bit easier. I'm not going to say easier, but I think there's more room in the training, in the education space right now for people to be human beings in healthcare. And I think that's very helpful. And so, there's a lot out there that they do at my school and at other places and try to do work-life balance and all this other stuff. Almost too much, I think, for some people in training.
Yeah.
So what I would say is, to use a approach of really trying to do one or two things as well as you can. If you were only going to be able to really nail down two things while you were in medical school, like I used to joke, we used to talk about in medical school, you could do one thing besides medical school.
You get your one thing, yeah.
Yeah, for me it was judo. Okay, do one thing besides medical school. I would advise that it be nutrition, but it might be that you could do a little more than nutrition and then move, nutrition and movement. But it's not going to be perfect. You've got to accept that.
Right.
And just really kind of iterate on, just doing it a little better each time. But never give up when you're in training. Never give up your humanity. Never give up your health. Never give up sort of wanting to always do that, because as soon as I believe, as soon as we give that up is usually where we end up like kind of like getting worse and worse and worse.
I love
if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So. I love that. And I love what you said earlier too about the habits, like thinking about, medical training is a long process. And so just bringing some attention to those habits that you're setting up now, realizing again, they're not going to be perfect, but trying to at least set a couple of good habits that will stick with you. Because it takes a long time to reverse habits once you feel like, you have that time again, although I don't think you ever will.
Well, you don't ever.
Yeah.
And like if I have like a lot of time, like if I'm like in an off service week and my habits are not like stable, because there's times when my habits aren't stable, then I don't fill my off service or my free time with doing the right thing. I tend to fill it with doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So like if my habits aren't stable, and I don't like to say good or bad habits. I say stable habits, meaning that they're not like shifting.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, like, I'm on Instagram or in social media, like way more, I had to kind of give up Facebook because I was like, I just never get anything out of it that's going to help me.
Right.
And it's, it kind of brings me towards that lower common denominator. That's just me.
And again, that's that dopamine response again, right? That's what social media is all based around.
Exactly. So, like if I'm going to use Instagram, it has to be on my computer. It has to be a conscious decision. So having positive displacement behaviors, I think are really important. So, when I'm not on service, I try to wake up early. I try to do the same thing I do when I am on service. So then when I'm on service, it doesn't hurt as much.
Right.
And I think those are really important skills for anyone, not just medical professionals. So
I love that. All right. Well, I want to start wrapping up. So I have 3 questions, which I'm sure you've thought about. 3 questions that I ask everyone at the end. So the first one is the 3 things that you do on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health.
I think one of them is meditation. I do really practice. I have a pretty steady meditation practice every day. When I wake up, I grab my cup of coffee and I sit down. It's usually silent meditation right now. Like I kind of burned out on Headspace after a couple of years of it. But I think, even if I feel like I don't have the time to do it, I sit down with at least a 5-minute intention. And usually I can get a little bit more in there. And if I don't, it doesn't have to be perfect. Right. If I don't get to the end of whatever I set time was, I'm happy that I sat down and did it. So the meditation is really the habit. It's not like meditate perfectly.
Right.
And so that's, I think, an important thing for me in terms of staying stable and sort of being able to do the things I did that. I'm pretty meticulous about nutrition. I'm not always, making every best choice, but I try to really source food very carefully, and I enjoy cooking, so I prepare most of my own food. And so that's the other critical habit for me in terms of that. And then obviously movement. So I don't just go to the gym anymore. I ride my bike around. I find ways in daily practice to always be moving, even if it's like, say I have a really difficult service day and I, happen to be taking the bus home. I might actually get off public transportation a few blocks earlier and climb over a hill to get home, because then at least I've moved.
Gotten a little extra walking,
I'll go get groceries and I will deliberately, carry 2 bags of groceries, and a farmer's carry the, mile and a half up the hill it takes me to get home, and I'm saying, okay, there's my workout. So I try to build in that movement as much as I like to go to the gym, which I enjoy doing in and of itself. I try to build movement, bike a little bit longer, lower the assist on the electric assist, whatever it takes to just have activity.
I love that. Those are great. Next question is one thing that you think would have a big impact on your health, but you are still working on it, or you haven't tried it yet.
There's like so many things there.
There's always more things to do.
I think, one thing that I think that like I could do better is probably journaling. I bullet journal somewhat consistently, but I tend not to go into the, there's a methodology for journaling that involves working through cognitive how your mind is thinking. That's a little bit more a meta-analysis. And it's easy to go through like a journal and say this happened and this happened and this happened, but not really like what was I thinking about it or, what were the assumptions that I had about it. So that sort of mindful, cognitive journaling is something that I tend to, like, you shouldn't say should all the time, but I really should do that some more because I tend to get a lot of insight from that. Yeah. And I think also with healthcare, one thing that I try to really promote with trainees is that reflective practice. And sort of like when you have those difficult interactions with patients or, difficult situations, to really take the time to work through them. And I think that journaling, for me at least personally, is a much better way to do that.
Definitely.
Than talking to people about it or anything else. Right. Just as allows me to get that practice.
And it's a very sort of intentional way where you are really just focusing on that. It's not just, like you said, talking to someone in the lounge about it or talking to your mom about it or
it's
whatever.
Not like a vet session or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. Last question is, what does a healthy life look like to you?
I think a healthy life for me is really being physically and mentally healthy enough to have, in the second half of my life, contributions, positive contributions to the people around me. It's not just being the absence of disease or sort of that classic fitness continuum thing. That's not really what I'm shooting for. I love to do pull-ups and stuff like that. But what I really like, for me, that healthy lifestyle is being able to sit down and disseminate information in a way that helps people, like talking to you or working with residents, working with students, people in the gym, and just having that positive impact on people. And always being able to sort of have that, moving forward and kind of pay back. I've had a lot of help. I've been able to ask for help and I've gotten a lot of assistance, if it was from my mom or from the people that have trained me, from coaches, from CrossFit and all of that to get where I'm at. And so really my job right now is to stay healthy enough to be able to give it back.
That's amazing. So. Wow. Well, it's so amazing to hear sort of your whole story. And I really appreciate that you're willing to share it with our audience. And I think that hopefully you are, the people listening to this, I think will agree that you are giving a lot of that back just by sharing your own experience and kind of the hard work that went into getting to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to tell the story. I'm usually kind of, I was like, I listened to your podcast and I was like, oh man, I am not like any of these people.
Well, everybody's different and everyone has their own story.
Public. Like I got I'm on Instagram, but like I never go there, like I don't have a social media presence, but the reality is that I think there's more people like me out there than there are
certainly,
that are just sort of struggling through life and trying to reach some point of, acceptance and health as they get older. And maybe that's the whole point of what we do. Like that's our job. One of our tasks in life is to learn how to, use what we're given.
Exactly.
So.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It was a real honor.
Awesome. Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. I loved getting to know Maude a little bit better, and there are tons of takeaways that I have from our conversation. Here are my top 3 that are going to stick with me the most. Number 1 was the importance of balance and not delaying how you really want to live your life. Maude and I talk about this in relationship to the medical field, but I think it applies no matter what your life path may be. We can always delay living our lives the way we really want to, but the habits that we create early in life stick with us, and you never know what your future has in store. So it's really important to set those habits up early, to do the things that you know you really want to do and that are best for your health, even if it seems like you don't have time at the moment. Number 2 was that if you love a good adrenaline burst, that's okay. But if you're constantly living in fight or flight, as Maude used to do in every aspect of life, the toll that this can take on your body is tremendous. It's so important to find ways to get our bodies into that rest and digest mode and upregulate that parasympathetic tone. Whether that's slowing down in your workouts, taking time for yourself, meditating, spending time in nature, whatever it is for you, protect and value those practices. And the third takeaway that I have is I loved how Maude talked about the importance of recognizing the underlying ways that we cope with stress and some of the emotional connections that we can have to certain habits. So as she talked about in this conversation, it was difficult for her to come to terms with her alcohol use. Often we have emotional connections with food or other habits, and until we address the underlying reasons and the emotions that are associated with those habits, it's hard to really make lasting changes. But if we lean in to that difficult task of working through those underlying emotions, the payoff can be really freeing, as you've seen in Maude's case for sure. So hopefully you enjoyed listening to the episode and you have some takeaways of your own. Never miss an episode, and to receive exclusive content from me, head to my website, juliefouché.com, and subscribe to my email list. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and consider giving the podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes. Also, don't forget to share your stories. If you or someone you know has used lifestyle to overcome a serious health challenge, please send me an email at info@juliefouché.com. I'll choose some of these inspiring stories to share here on future episodes. Don't forget you can train with me through Beyond the Whiteboard by visiting trainwithjuliefouché.com. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on Pursuing Health. This episode is brought to you by ButcherBox. I'm really excited to share with you that this month, in addition to $20 off your first order, ButcherBox has a very special gift that is so good, I can't even mention it on the podcast. You can learn more about it at butcherbox.com/Julie, where you can find all the details. So if you know me, you know I care a lot about where my food comes from, and that's particularly true when it comes to meat. I believe that meat can have a place in a well-rounded diet, but there's a huge difference when it comes to animals that are raised in feedlots and that are fed primarily corn and soy and routinely given growth hormones and antibiotics, and those that are responsibly raised, fed their natural diet, and never given growth hormones or antibiotics. High-quality meat like this is hard to find, but ButcherBox makes it super easy because they deliver 100% grass-fed and finished beef, free-range organic chicken, and heritage breed pork, as well as wild Alaskan sockeye salmon directly to your doorstep. All of their products are humanely raised and never, ever given antibiotics or hormones. This gives me some peace of mind knowing that I can trust my meat is the highest quality out there and will taste amazing. Plus, they offer free shipping anywhere in the contiguous 48 United States, which is awesome. Right now, ButcherBox has put together a very special deal for all Pursuing Health listeners. If you order your first box, you'll get a very special gift plus an additional $20 off. And as I mentioned, that special gift is so epic, I can't even talk about it here. You'll have to go to butcherbox.com/Julie to check out the deal and get your $20 off your first order. Now remember, it's only available until supplies last, so go check it out right now. Once again, that's $20 off plus a special gift with your first box by going to butcherbox.com/Julie. Check it out. I promise it will be worth it.